Welcome to the Coffee in the Barn. I'm Casey Bradley, President and founder of the Swine Group. If you are thinking about entering, changing, advancing, or reinventing your career in the animal science industry, we are here to help you succeed. In each episode, we will cover a variety of topics surrounding work, life, and professional development, leveraging my 20-plus years as a global leader within the livestock industry and my ever-growing professional network to interview other leading professionals. We couldn't do this without our sponsors, NutriQuest, IFF, and Continental Search. Reach out to us on our social media platforms or visit theswineGroup.com and subscribe now not to miss another episode. Well, we're back for season 2, and we have another member of our Coffee and Careers in Animal Science Committee, and that is Dr. Justin Fix with Acuity Swine. Welcome, Justin.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this today.
Yeah, would you mind introducing yourself and your role with Acuity for the audience?
Absolutely. So, Justin Fix, my role today, or my title, I should say, is Director of Business Development and Genetic Improvement. Being a small/young company that has more responsibilities than it may seem like on the surface. Today, I'm going to say this from the standpoint of kind of the breadth of it. So there's 3 and a half. One's a consultant salesman that report to me. So I have the sales and an individual contributor in terms of the key accounts myself. Also the technical team on the genetics side. We have 3 geneticists that today directly report to me and kind of across the spectrum of genetic technology. And then also 2 reproductive physiologists who both have other roles. One who's she's either been interviewed or will be interviewed. Amanda Minton is a part of this. So she is a reproductive physiologist who oversees our boar studs, but also provides technical support to customers and our internal team and does our university research. And then another gentleman, Dale Henches, who oversees our data platform and provides reproductive support. So the team is diverse in what they do and has multiple responsibilities, as well as my own oversight of that team, which I'm quite lucky because they don't require much from me because it's difficult to keep up with them, but it's a really good group of people that I'm lucky to lead.
Well, it's awesome. I know you as a geneticist. So describe your different roles and why you moved and how you got to be a business development manager.
I am a geneticist by training, undergrad at Iowa State and actually ag business. So I was an ag business major. Some of you may be familiar at Iowa State. Ag business is mostly in the econ department. So it's more of an economics degree. I mean, there's ag business, but there's a heavy economics influence, which was really kind of one of my early interests in numbers. So that rolled into more exposure to swine breeding and genetics, which as a younger kid, I didn't really realize existed, but you can do numbers and you can do animals. I said, hey, this sounds interesting. So that's what led me to getting my graduate degree at North Carolina Graduate Degrees. At North Carolina State in animal science. Animal and poultry science is the definition of the title, I guess, but it was truly an animal breeding and genetics degree. Also, while there, I took a couple econ classes, learned very quickly that there are people far smarter in the economics world than I'll ever be, but I passed them, and that was the key. So that was my foundation of education in graduate school that got me into the genetics field, and I was never a strong technical geneticist. I can understand the concepts, but in terms of deriving and fully getting into the new methodologies or things like that wasn't my forte, but I understood enough to run a simple genetic program, if you would, but then probably more so interact with those who understood the technical level and I could communicate with them, but I couldn't do what they could. I say that because as I've gone through my career, which from there went to the National Swine Registry, at the time had 5 or 6, almost 7 purebred breeders that were still doing a lot of domestic and international business. And my responsibility there was running the genetic program. Now, it was kind of keeping it going. As I look back, I'm a little shocked that I had that responsibility as I've gotten further into my career, but that was actually running that. That was also my first exposure to kind of sales and business development on a lot of international trips. Kind of the consulting. I didn't do the sales per se, but I was used by the team, by the exporters to speak the technical and what we were doing. But it got a lot of the trade shows, exposure to that. Spent 3 years there, enjoyed my time there, met my future wife, and then we moved on to Smithfield. Spent 5 years with Smithfield, and that role, director of genetic programs. And that's where got into a system where there was somebody, a gentleman by the name of Kent Gray, who he and his team ran the genetic program. I was able to contribute from kind of the liaison between production and speak to it. But the technical part, there was 3 or 4 people in there that did it and were awesome. And so I didn't have to worry about that. And I got more exposure in the Smithfield system to some sales development with, they were captive customers to a certain extent. It wasn't really expanding customers, but there was a customer service relationship there. And I really started enjoying that, but also realized at the time, Smithfield wasn't interested in growing their genetic business and selling it and capturing more. And I was intrigued by that. So the opportunity at the time came up with the Maschhoffs. I didn't mention this, but Clint Schwab, my boss today, and we can talk about it more, was my judging coach at Iowa State, my boss at NSR, and then ultimately recruited me to the Maschhoffs. And I'm not sure I knew, actually, no, I didn't know where we'd be today, but the idea of launching a genetic company was there. And the sales and the growth and the international component, all the things that I kind of missed a little bit and didn't get at Smithfield were there as opportunities. And to be honest, I viewed it as an opportunity to create a legacy in the industry that you don't get very often. There aren't very many genetic companies that start, basically zero. And so this was a chance to do it. And if we were successful, awesome. And if not, we get to go find something else. So that's what got me to this point. And the more I was in the role here and the more business development sales I got to do, the more I liked it and really enjoy the opportunity to get to meet people and interact with them and really trying to bring them value. And whatever that might be is something that really ignites me and something I enjoy thoroughly.
Awesome. And we hope to have Clint on here also for the Coffee in the Barn to kind of describe that journey and that entrepreneurial type spirit and coming out of production. It's a really unique story. I think it's a champion story for our industry. So I can't wait to have the opportunity to interview him and learn more about the story behind Acuity Swine.
I'm sure we can get him to do that.
Yeah. So based on that, I think you probably mentioned it, but I'm sure there's a few others, but who mentored you or influenced your career decisions?
That's when I always got to be careful talking about too much, because then the entire podcast world can hear me cry. I asked this question last week at a presentation, and it really starts out, obviously your family, you have that aspect, but professionally, my family isn't, we grew up on a farm, but they're not involved in the industry, but you see them as how they act and how they go about their business and how they behave, and that molds things from that standpoint. And that's probably where it started out, that my mentors, for the most part, aren't ones that are there like coaching you and in your face, and not in your face in a bad way, but that are very direct about it. For me, it's much more of seeing how they behave and watching them, and people that do that without having to impart the wisdom on me intentionally, but more so just in how they show up is what's always what I've kind of attracted myself to. And I hadn't really thought about it until just now, that's kind of how my parents were. They weren't super intentional with, hey, this is how you need to do this. This is, think about this. But if I did pay attention to how they showed up in life, professionally speaking, not complaining, taking on new roles, growing what they're doing within their roles. And you see that and you're like, okay, that's how it works. That's how you want to do it. Then into high school, very fortunate to have an interaction through my high school FFA with the late Mr. Dave Fowler. He was a little more in your face in terms of mentoring, but also really pushed, very successful FFA program. Ultimately, what pushed me down the judging, not pushed me, but guided me down the path of judging, where I could get a scholarship to go judge at a community college. Did that. And then starting at Iowa State, Clint was my judging coach there. And again, not one of like, hey, you need to go to grad school, you need to do this, but seeing what he was doing, seeing what his background was from judging into that, kind of a similar interest in numbers, and also the livestock component and improving animals, not just from a number standpoint, but also the historical breeder, the feet and legs, the phenotype. You can combine that, and you have an opportunity to come into an industry where, I don't think this is arrogant, but you have him, myself, or people that can understand the science, but also understand the value of what a decent animal is. It doesn't matter how good an index is or how good whatever is, if the animal can't be functional, at some point, it's going to be a problem. And I think that's not the topic for today, but I think we see that in some particular traits in the industry is that aspect. So when you have that and you can combine the art and the breeder, that was a mentor, if you will, of just saying, hey, there's someone that's doing that and moving on and going from there. And then after that, grad school, Dr. Todd C., you get lucky sometimes, right? You go down on a visit, someone to connect. Dr. Boz, Tom Boz is the one that connected me. Went to Ohio State, visit with Steve Moeller, who great person and very much enjoy Steve. And North Carolina State, I'm not a big fan. Ohio State's campus, big in the middle of the city, just coming from Iowa State, it was different. Campus feel, just the atmosphere was different. NC State, those of you been there, is also in the middle of a big city, but it's a different feel of a campus. It's still kind of small inside the city as well. It just had more of an Iowa State feel to it. It was nice and warm when I visited in January. So I got to that part of with that. And those were the decisions made, not because my 2 hour of my daily interaction with Todd C was like, yes, this is a man that's going to influence my life. But ultimately through those other things did that. And again, a person that's not in your face, not in your business. He became department head the summer after my first year of my Ph.D., I think. So it wasn't a bunch of time, but you just see, we were talking before this started about, kind of being scrappy or resourceful. And just someone who never, a lot of faculties, you hear them complain about not having enough money and grants and all this other stuff and just honestly whining. You never hear that from him. He's like, they'll find a way. We'll figure it out. And that aspect was, I'm innately that way. Like, it'll be all right. My wife drives my wife crazy, which, my wife, you've known her for long, you've known her longer than I have. She has this thing on the counter that says, it'll be all right. And she got it just because it makes her angry every time I say it. And so she has it there. Oh, I like that. But that aspect there again of just seeing that in the career too it doesn't mean you're flipping, or it doesn't mean you don't work hard or put things in, but it's just an aspect of you do. And if it doesn't work out, you figure out another way, and it will be all right. As long as you're waking up today, you got a chance. But he never sat down and told me that. You just could see that, and you could see how he approached that. And then again, back to Clint. Clint's been a huge part a lot of times in my life, from grad school to 2 different jobs, but all that. So those are a long way of saying it had been my parents, my high school FA advisor, Clint, judging coach / boss a couple times, and then as well, Dr. C at NC State.
Pretty cool. So obviously you grew up in showing and judging, similar to my background as well and your wife's. When you were a kid, what did you want to do when you grew up? Because obviously I'm not sure it's quite what you envisioned.
Well, at some point, I wanted to probably be a professional soccer player. Then I was like, wow, I'm not very fast. I was like when I was 7 or 8, and then everybody else got faster. Then probably into football, baseball, that little thing. You're going to do that, but probably reality set in, let's say middle school or high school, like that's not happening either. There might have been like a rodeo thought in my mind at some point in time, but then I'd never actually ridden a bull. So it probably got into at least some considerations in high school at vet school. And I can't really think back like the exact moment where I was like, I don't want to do that. But somewhere along the lines, I've always enjoyed math. Science is fine, but more so on the math side. I wasn't a big chemistry fan or those. I mean, it's whatever, right? You went through it and you passed it and did fine in it, but it wasn't something that interested me, where math has always been a really strong interest. So I got into my community college. I started getting into, okay, what do I want to do? And grad school is mostly there just phased growing up. Like, I don't know, probably a little bit of arrogance of wanting a graduate degree and having that advanced degree. But it really probably wasn't until my graduate and almost to graduate school, my fourth year of undergrad, where I really had any idea of where I was heading. So when I went from young to there, there was no, I want to do this in life. And it probably goes to the suggestion is you just try things because you never really know what you want to do. I will say though, kids today probably have an opportunity for more exposure to what's out there than we might have when we were younger. I mean, we didn't have internet until high school, late high school, at least I didn't. And it was dial up, and into college, there was you had it, but you didn't, not everybody had laptops and cell phones. So your exposure to everything out there was less, but it's still, I think the same thing is you don't know what you don't know. You may think it is from the outside, or you may think this is a potential career, but honestly, probably the exposure of an internship at PIC between my master's and PhD with Dave Casey. I should have mentioned him as a mentor. It was a very short segment of mentor, but an internship. And then he ultimately moved to China not far after I graduated. So I haven't seen him as much, but very influential part. But seeing what it was inside a genetic company was like, okay, this is, I think, where I want to be. So I was 25 or 26 before 24, 25 before I really got to there. So that was a long way of saying I kind of wanted a little bit of everything, but was never like, I'm going to do this in my life. And ultimately kind of just settled on. There was even a point in time my parents were, it's a funny story. My parents, through another relationship of some friends, had been owners in some payday loans, which we can talk. That's a whole nother conversation as to the morality around that. But regardless, they were owners in it, and they needed a store manager. So I thought pretty strongly about quitting school and going doing that, because $45,000 to manage a store when I was in school was like, man, that's awesome. Then fortunately I did not, because that would have been a poor decision. But that was the way I said I had ideas, but never really like I need to do this or I want to do this. And ultimately landed on something like I'm super glad I did, but a little bit of fate that just kind of wandered down the path, I guess.
I love it because I grew up with my life thinking this is exactly what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
And of course, got to college and said, no, I don't want to be a veterinarian, other opportunities. And now in my life, I'm like, let's just see what happens. That's been a big change in my mind and perception, my mindset to say, let's just see where the road leads and let's learn what we can along the way.
So we did some personality things, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically this one on like, your fear of, not fear like I'm not scared of dying, fear like fear of like basically losing your job, or like the security. Is a security aspect in there. I'm like off the charts, don't care. Not off the charts, but like most people are in the middle. We had somebody on the way end, I'm on the other end. And really for me, it creates a level, and I don't know where it comes from, right? I don't practice that. It's just how I am. And it creates a level of freedom that the reason I want to be good at my job isn't because I'm worried about losing my job. It's I want to be good at my job because the respect and the interaction I have with the people is what drives it. Not that I'm worried about my boss getting mad and firing me, because if he did, I'll go find a different job. That's the subject too, right? You can't just not care, but not also have this thing that makes you do, or that drives you to do the right thing and to serve people. But because that's also high, it creates this freedom that there's not very little time worrying about, am I doing it right enough? We're doing it well enough. It's focusing on that receiving and what they're kind of showing or telling you, more so than a fear of being successful in your job. And I don't know if that makes sense. It does in my mind. So trying to articulate it, but
it totally does, Justin. I mean, my coach said before I started my own business that something dramatic was supposed to, would have to happen to push me off that ledge because of that fear of unknown. And I'm a numbers person, and I was making pathways financially to say, yeah, I can make the jump, but losing the job with GSM just pushed me off. And you know what? I was really worried about it. I did things right. I had a contract for part-time work and build my other stuff. And I'm like, this is working. People, if I just be myself and I serve, I've always had to be resourceful, and, working on a farm, managing a farm, especially in Arkansas, we didn't have the best facilities. And we talked about being resourceful, and I think we find a way, right?
it's always careful, right? Because it's not, you just sit there and let things happen. You still have to work hard, show up and do it. But at the same time, if something doesn't work out, there's a reason why. Being open, and whether that's driven by faith, a lot of people, that's a big part of what faith is. If people are into that, and I'm not promoting one way or the other, I'm not here to say, no, that's my relationship that I work through. But if that belief that it happens for a reason, and you show up and do your best, and that's the thing, you got to look in the mirror every day and tell yourself, no one else can tell you that. If you're doing that, we're all going to fall flat at some point. Some of us unfortunately fall much harder and much flatter due to nothing on your own. And you look at yourself every day and go, I'm not sure why it hasn't happened to me. I'm grateful that it hasn't, but if it does, it'll be my turn. And I hope it doesn't, but if it does, it does. And you got to keep marching forward.
Well, even for a guy who just lets things ride and doesn't seem to be so worried, what were some hard lessons you learned in your career, or what did you have to sacrifice or compromise on?
Like looking back, I've been fortunate, from the standpoint of like a career. People have the stories of downsizing or whatever may. I haven't dealt with anything like that. Very, very fortunately, I haven't had to deal with. I've had, for the most part, the people that have been my bosses for well, I've only had 3, but so I got to be careful in how I describe this, because it doesn't take long to figure out who my bosses were. But I've been very fortunate in terms of different people, but also people that have contributed to me greatly. So I haven't had to deal with the jerk of a boss or those challenges like that way. I've been very, very lucky, or whatever the word I want to use. I'm very grateful for those types of things that have not happened to me. Some of the bigger things, though, as I think through, I was 27, 28, and I got the first person reporting to me. Kind of want to call them up and apologize, just from the standpoint of, got so focused in what your role is, you spend very little time on them. And by them, I mean, whether it's development, I could try to develop myself. How can I develop somebody else? We're just giving them the time to, people just want to know what they need to do every day. And are they doing it right? And helping them through that process. And I wasn't even having like regular calls with employees until probably 4 years into being a boss and then, or to leading people. And then, you're kind of out there on a whim. And I hear people talk about, I haven't talked to my boss in like a month. I'm like, shit, I was that I was that person at one point in time. Sorry, you'll have to explicit content.
We're just rolling.
I was that boss. Like, they may not have heard from me in 3 or 4 weeks. I didn't want to be a micromanager. I didn't want to do that. And I'll call them and talk to them. And then next thing you know, you don't call them for 3 weeks and they haven't heard from you. And now it's probably been since I came to the Maschhoffs that it's been direct. Newer employees, I talk to them weekly. And it's a weekly call and they get an hour. It doesn't go an hour every time, but it's on my calendar. And if they need it, and sometimes, as you said, we got the different roles, I can be distracted and I'm not fully there. And I work on that every day, but give them that hour. And then the ones that are around longer, it's every other week. And it may get moved. Rarely does it get canceled. If I'm on vacation, maybe, but at least gets moved to within the week. So they have that time frame, or maybe the 2-hour one I might push to the next week, or the 2-week one push to the next week. But to give that time that they get me for whatever they need, and making sure that they're not waiting on me for answers, or they're not twiddling their thumbs because it's something for me. And it does happen. Don't get me wrong, I do. But that's probably the biggest one, of going back, of thinking about myself. If I didn't talk to my boss for 3 or 4 days or 3 or 4 weeks, and what you need, and just how quickly you feel disconnected when you haven't talked to them for a couple of weeks. And that aspect of working through it has been a big part of a lesson learned. And I'm trying to think of some other things, but those are probably the biggest one, is on the leadership area, of really, really understanding what that needs to look like and continuing. It's a never ending and evolving process, further than I was, but there's still a long way to go to get there.
With that in mind, would you go back and change anything? I think maybe I heard a little tone that you may have tried to do things differently early on as a supervisor, but.
Yeah, I can't remember. So I always used to say I don't like to have regret. And then I heard a podcast that the only people that don't have regret are psychopaths. And I was like, ooh, maybe I should have some regret. And it's a balance, right? It's semantics, right? You don't want to sit around and just go, man, all day, every day, I wish I would have done this differently, because you've chosen it. However, if given the opportunity to go back and do something different, I would, but I don't stew on it. I don't sit there and think about it and have the regret at that standpoint. So it is one that since I've heard that, I've really tried to not force myself into believing I don't have regret, because I do, but it's not something you stew over. It's more so of if given the chance, I would do that different, but I can't. So let's continue to move on and learn from that. And if it comes up, I will do it differently next time. So yes, a big thing on that is on the leadership side, would absolutely do that differently. I would also go back and look at, as I've said, the passive mentor. I would likely be a lot more aggressive in being a seeking out mentors, and probably also myself offering it more. It's not easy we joke with Clint on this all the time. He'll say, I ask people, I said, well, Clint, you're like the president. People who are a level or two below me aren't just going to like easily speak to you. Nothing because you're an incredibly approaching person, but there's this hierarchy in Western society, like business, that we have, that people are ingrained to feel less comfort with you, no matter how much you try. There's just this level of, oh, he's president, like he says jump and they say how high, even though he's the furthest from that expectation. So I say, like, that was a long way of getting into their mentoring thing, where people, if they sought me out and asked me, I said yes tomorrow, but they're oftentimes not going to seek you out, because that's a big request and that's not an easy one. So how you create that opportunity to support others through the process, and in nothing more, just what I learned not to do versus what to do, would be a big part. The other thing too is my work is probably more the balance across life. To be successful in work, it's not just work, it's physical fitness. It is your relationships, family, friends, how you're contributing to that, how you're giving it all there. It's, some faith aspect, being connected there, and whatever that may be. And whether it's faith from the mind, it's a mind clearing component, whether it's meditating, faith, something to create space, to just allow space in your life. And then the other one being community, in terms of giving back. What's life without a legacy, and that legacy, kind of all those areas. And I've not been in those every area of life. Even today, I was going to get up, and I said it last Friday too. I'm going to get up and go work out, and I didn't. Daughter woke up in the middle of the night, or throat hurt. Make the excuse, I don't want to get up. I need to sleep in more.
Well, I need to introduce you to Louisa, because she'll make sure you show up. That's what you need in your life, with Louisa.
No, I know. And it is one of those things too, of where you get those, the partners. So you can meet someone at the gym at 6 o'clock. You're going to be there more often, because you're not going to let that person down, versus yourself. We crap on ourselves every day, but other people likely less to do that. So I say that's probably the areas I go back and do the most in is not, and I'm fortunate. Somebody asked me that. I have a wife who's not afraid to tell me that I need to get my crap together when it comes to working, being distracted, things like that, traveling, whatever. That helps me there. But when you're being reactive versus proactive, it's not the same effect. So those are things I think about a lot and still have a ton of growth into to get that across life. And without that aspect, I'm not able to contribute as much in every area as I could.
Well, awesome. We're running a little short on time, but I do have one question for you because I've done this with everybody I've interviewed about coffee and careers in animal science. Why or what value or why do you want to participate and where do you want to see coffee and careers in animal science grow into?
Real quick on the background, I'd known who you were. And it wasn't until about a year ago, actually, that you came up and introduced yourself. And then we made the connection, or you made the connection, because you obviously know my wife. And I'd known who you were, but I didn't know you guys were connected. And then learned more about what you were doing. And then learned, Man had been participating and through that involvement. And, I'm always intrigued by these components of, not intrigued, but appreciative of some way of helping students. So much of the historical models, okay, you get your Ph.D., all right, go find a job somewhere, and they kind of teach you, because the academic training into industry, it's almost seeming like not all programs, but a fair number of programs, the academic training is set up to then turn you into an academic situation. And that transition from an academic training to an industry situation is a big step. Knowing what's out there and being connected is not, we're not optimizing or maximizing that as an industry today. And I'm seeing what you're doing. I was going to say attempting to do, but you're actually doing it, is an opportunity to lessen that step or close that gap or whatever you want to say. And I'm all for it. And I looked at it and there wasn't a geneticist on there. So I needed to make sure I represented that as well. But no, it's really that gap, or that how we support people from going from a graduate program of some sort into the world of whatever it may be, and making that a little bit easier, because it's a big step. It is scary. It is scary.
Yeah, and we're trying to diversify the program and have, like you said, geneticists. With Amanda, we have the reprophysiology. We have nutritionists, of course. We're trying to get more ruminants back into it. But I get a lot of pull for some of the students that, it's a very swine-heavy focused program. But at the same time, agriculture is agriculture, and you can learn from anybody. And I challenge students to get outside of their comfort zone or what they think they want to be when they grow up. And that's the number one thing I tell them now is you don't really know. But the more exposure you get, the more people you interact with, like you said, that passive mentorship, I think is really critical into defining who you're going to become. And it's okay with me saying I'm over 40 now, and I can't believe it, but I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up.
I got 7 months before I'm 40. So I haven't quite hit it yet, but yeah, just like that Jeff Hansen talk, right? Somebody that's from, as a specific example, somebody that's not from swine and doesn't know who Jeff is, but somebody from swine, like, oh, that's Jeff, he's got all this background, blah, blah, blah. But what he talked about in the investing and all the different things, he's always had an interest in that. And he gave back to people who likely would have nobody talk to them about that ever. And they may not ever give it interest and ever give it a second thought. And you could have dramatically helped them financially just by giving them things to think about that may never have had the training for.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Justin. It was a pleasure to have you on this episode.
Thank you.
We hope you liked this interview. You can listen to this and other episodes on coffeeinthebarn.buzzsprout.com. We would also like to thank our sponsors, NutriQuest, IFF, and Continental Research. We are grateful for supporting us in this journey. Remember to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram at Coffee and Careers in Animal Science, and our YouTube channel, Animal Science Office Hours. But before we go, we would like to remind you that we just launched our ebook, which presents a series of tips and advice to improve your networking, presentation, and speaking skills, making you stand out among other professionals. Subscribe to our email list by clicking in the link in the show notes to get your ebook, news about future episodes, upcoming events, programs, and more. Also, if you love the Sunswine Group's outreach and mission, please consider supporting the cause and buy us a coffee. The link will be in the show notes as well. I promise, the money will keep funding our amazing outreach, our student extern, and new solutions for animal agriculture. Remember, life is short. Take your coffee in the barn. See you next week.